Danny Cole heard the sound coming from the waste disposal chute. It was a small cry, weak and afraid, like something dying. He stopped walking and looked around the corridor. No one else was there. The other workers had already gone to their quarters for the night cycle, and the aliens who ran Orbital Station did not walk through the maintenance sections. He should have kept moving. He knew that. His shift had ended 2 hours ago, and he was tired from loading cargo all day. The merchants who owned most of the station's trade operations had kept him working late, as they always did with human workers. They paid humans less and worked them harder because humans were new to the Galactic Compact and had no powerful friends among the elder species. But Danny could not ignore that sound. He had grown up on a farm in Nebraska before joining the space merchant fleet, and he had heard animals make that kind of cry before. It was the sound of something that had given up hope. He walked to the waste chute and looked inside. The metal tube led down to the recycling systems that processed garbage from the entire station. Anything thrown in there would be broken down into base materials within minutes, but something had gotten stuck on a small ledge just inside the opening. Danny reached in and pulled out the creature. It fit in the palm of his hand. It had fur that was dirty and matted, large dark eyes that looked up at him with fear, and 4 small limbs that trembled against his fingers. He had no idea what species it was. In his 3 years on station, he had seen hundreds of different alien animals kept as pets or sold as food. This one matched nothing in his memory. The creature made that small crying sound again. Danny could feel its heart beating fast against his palm. It was cold and hungry and scared. Someone had thrown it away like garbage. Danny put the creature inside his jacket and walked to his quarters. He did not think about what he was doing. He did not consider the station rules about unregistered or the trouble he might face if someone found out. He simply acted on an instinct that went deeper than thought. Something small and helpless needed him, and he would not turn away. His quarters were small, just a single room with a bed, a desk, and a tiny bathroom. Humans on station did not get much space, but it was warm and safe, and that was enough. Danny set the creature on his bed and went to find something it could eat. He tried water first, dripping it slowly near its mouth. The creature licked at it desperately. Then he offered small pieces of the protein bar he had saved from lunch. The creature ate them so fast it almost choked. Danny sat on the bed and watched the creature eat. Its fur was starting to dry, and he could see it was lighter than he had first thought, almost silver in places. Its eyes were not just dark but seemed to hold depth, like looking into a pool of still water at night. He decided to call it Scout. He did not know why that name came to him, but it felt right. The next morning, Danny went to his shift with Scout hidden in a small bag he carried over his shoulder. He could not leave the creature alone in his room. It was too weak, and he worried it might die if he was not there to feed it and keep it warm. He worked carefully, keeping the bag close and checking on Scout whenever he had a free moment. He made it through most of the day before the notice. Counselor was the station administrator, a tall being with clicking mandibles and compound eyes that saw everything. Walked through the cargo bay during the afternoon shift, inspecting the work and reminding everyone of his authority. He stopped when he saw Danny. The counselor's mandibles clicked with amusement. He had noticed the bag moving. He demanded to see what Danny was hiding. Danny had no choice but to show him. The laughter started immediately, made a sound that the translation device rendered as loud, mocking amusement. He called over 2 other merchants who were nearby. They gathered around Danny and looked at the small creature in his hands. They called it a garbage pet. They asked Danny if humans were so primitive that they formed bonds with waste. They wondered aloud if this was why humanity had achieved so little in its short time among the stars. One of the merchants suggested that Danny should throw the creature back where he found it before it spread disease. Danny said nothing. He put Scout back in the bag and returned to work. They continued laughing as they walked away. Word spread quickly on a station like. By the end of the day, everyone knew about the human who had adopted garbage. The diplomats, cold reptilian beings who handled much of the station's political affairs, sent a formal notice to Danny's supervisor. They warned that keeping an unidentified was against regulations and potentially dangerous. They recommended that Danny surrender the creature for study and disposal. His supervisor was a human woman named Park. She was older than Danny and had been on station for nearly 10 years. She had learned how to survive among aliens who looked down on her species. She read the notice and then looked at Danny. She asked him if the creature was dangerous. Danny said no. She asked if it had shown any signs of disease. Danny said no. She asked if he was willing to take responsibility for it. Danny said yes. Filed the creature as an emotional support animal under the compact's welfare provisions. It was a small protection, but it was something. The could not force Danny to give up Scout without proving it was a threat, and so far it had done nothing but eat and sleep and look at Danny with those deep, dark eyes. Days passed and became weeks. Scout grew stronger. It started moving around Danny's quarters on its own, exploring every corner and watching everything Danny did. Sometimes Danny talked to it while he ate dinner or prepared for sleep. He told Scout about his life on Earth, about the farm and his family and the stars he used to watch from his bedroom window. Scout always listened, its eyes fixed on Danny's face. The mockery continued. Danny heard the whispers and the laughter whenever he walked through the public areas of the station. They called him the garbage keeper. Some of the other humans avoided him, worried that his strange behavior would make life harder for all of them. But Danny did not care. He had Scout and Scout had him. That was enough. Then one night, Danny noticed something strange. Scout was eating more than a creature its size should need. It was growing faster than seemed possible. And sometimes, when Danny spoke, Scout would tilt its head and make sounds that almost seemed like it was trying to respond. Danny watched Scout sleeping that night and wondered what exactly he had saved from that waste chute. He had a feeling that he was about to find out. 3 months had passed since Danny found Scout in the waste chute. Everything had changed. Counselor had demoted Danny from cargo handling to maintenance work. The official reason was performance issues, but everyone knew the truth. Did not like Danny. The human with the garbage pet had become a source of embarrassment for the station administrator. Every time a visiting dignitary heard the story and laughed, felt his authority being questioned. So he pushed Danny down to the lowest job available, cleaning filters and fixing broken pipes in the parts of the station no one else wanted to visit. Danny did not complain. The maintenance job was harder in some ways, but it also meant fewer eyes watching him, fewer aliens to mock him and his strange companion. He could work in peace and return to his quarters each night to find Scout waiting for him. But Scout was not the same creature Danny had rescued, not anymore. The animal had grown to the size of a large dog. Its fur had developed streaks of silver that seemed to catch the light in unusual ways, almost glowing when the room was dim. Its body had changed shape too. The 4 small limbs had become longer and more defined. The front 2 now looked almost like arms, with fingers that could grip and hold objects. Scout had started walking upright on its back legs, moving through Danny's quarters with a grace that seemed impossible for something that had been so weak just months ago. The aliens on the station had noticed. The merchants who used to laugh now went quiet when Danny walked past. They crossed to the other side of corridors to avoid coming close to Scout. The diplomats watched from a distance with their cold, calculating eyes. Something was happening that they did not understand, and that made them nervous. Vessel Speaker was the senior diplomat on station. He requested a meeting with Danny through official channels. When Danny arrived at the diplomatic section, was waiting in a chamber decorated with the symbols of a dozen different treaties. The scales were dark green, almost black, and his voice came through the translator as flat and emotionless. Demanded that Danny surrender the creature for study. He argued that Scout was clearly not a normal animal. Its rapid growth and physical changes suggested it might be an invasive species designed to infiltrate and harm. Or worse, it could be a bioweapon left over from one of the ancient wars that had shaped the galaxy long before humanity reached the stars. Danny refused. He said Scout had never hurt anyone. He said Scout was his responsibility and he would not abandon it. Eyes narrowed. He warned Danny that they had ways of getting what they wanted. He suggested that Danny think carefully about his position before making enemies he could not afford. Danny left the meeting feeling cold inside. He knew they were dangerous. They had been part of the Galactic Compact for thousands of years and had connections everywhere. If they decided to take Scout by force, Danny would have no way to stop them. But he was not alone. Park called a meeting of the human workers that night. Nearly 40 people gathered in the common room of the human residential block, stood at the front and explained the situation. She said that Danny had done nothing wrong. She said that the aliens were afraid of what they did not understand, and that fear was making them act badly. She asked who would stand with Danny if the council tried to take his companion. Every hand in the room went up. Chris was one of those hands. He worked in the station's communication center, monitoring signals and managing data traffic. He was younger than Danny, with red hair and a quick smile, but he was also smart and good with technology. After the meeting, he pulled Danny aside and offered to help. Chris said he would keep his ears open for any unusual communications about Scout. If Thea or anyone else was planning something, Chris would know about it first. Danny thanked him and meant it. Having friends on this station was rare. Having friends willing to take risks was even rarer. The council meeting happened 2 days later. Counselor presided, his mandibles clicking with barely hidden satisfaction. Vessel Speaker presented the position, demanding that Scout be seized and studied. He called Danny to speak in his own defense. Danny stood before the council with Scout beside him. The creature sat on its back legs, its silver-streaked fur clean and bright, its dark eyes watching the assembled aliens with an intelligence that made several of them uncomfortable. Danny spoke simply. He said Scout was his friend. He said Scout had shown no aggression and posed no threat. He asked only to be left in peace. Park spoke next. She cited the compact's provisions for emotional support animals. She argued that taking Scout without evidence of danger would violate Danny's rights as a registered citizen. She reminded the council that humans were watching how this situation was handled, and that the compact depended on all species being treated fairly. The council voted. The decision was close, but Danny won. Scout could stay, at least for now, but the council required regular check-ins and reserved the right to revisit the decision if anything changed. Danny walked back to his quarters that night feeling like he had survived a battle. Scout walked beside him, upright and steady, drawing stares from everyone they passed. When they reached the room, Danny sat on his bed and let out a long breath. He asked Scout if it understood what had just happened. He asked if Scout knew how close they had come to being separated. Scout turned to face him. Its dark eyes held something that Danny could only describe as warmth, and then it spoke. The word was clear and unmistakable. Scout said learning. Danny stared. His heart pounded in his chest. He asked Scout to say it again. Scout walked to the small desk in the corner of the room. Danny kept a broken data pad there, a device he had planned to throw away but never gotten around to disposing of. Scout picked it up with its strange, finger-like limbs and began manipulating the screen. The device flickered to life. Scout looked at Danny and spoke again. Learning, understanding, growing. Danny realized then that Scout was not a pet at all. Scout was something else entirely. Something that had been waiting and watching and absorbing everything around it. Something that was becoming more than anyone had imagined. He did not report this to anyone. He did not tell or Chris or the council. He simply sat with Scout in that small room and began to teach it. He showed it words and pictures and explanations of the world. Scout learned faster than Danny could believe. Danny knew he was taking a risk. He knew that if anyone found out what Scout was becoming, the council would not hesitate to act. But he also knew that he had made a promise when he pulled Scout from that waste chute. He had promised to protect something small and helpless, and he would keep that promise, no matter what Scout turned out to be. 6 months had passed since that night in the waste disposal corridor. Scout now stood almost as tall as Danny, walking upright with a natural grace that made the aliens of station stare in wonder and fear. The silver streaks in its fur had spread until they covered most of its body, giving Scout an appearance that seemed to glow softly in dim light. But the biggest change was hidden from everyone except Danny and his closest friends. Scout could speak, not just single words anymore, but full sentences, complete thoughts, questions and observations and ideas that showed a mind developing at a speed that should have been impossible. They kept this secret carefully. When Scout walked through the station with Danny, it stayed quiet. It let the aliens believe it was still just an unusual animal, strange and unsettling but not truly intelligent. Only in the privacy of Danny's quarters did Scout reveal its true self. The conversations they had during those long nights changed everything. Danny thought he knew about the universe. Scout remembered things, fragments at first, like pieces of a dream that would not quite come into focus. But as the weeks passed, the fragments became clearer. Scout remembered warmth and light. It remembered voices speaking in a language that had no translation. It remembered fear and pain and then nothing at all until it woke up cold and alone in a waste chute on a station full of strangers. Danny listened to these memories with growing wonder. He asked Scout where it came from. He asked what species it belonged to. He asked why it had been alone and helpless when he found it. Scout did not know all the answers, but it knew some of them. There was a species called the. They had existed long before any of the current members of the Galactic Compact had achieved space travel. There were beings of immense power, able to touch minds and move objects with thought alone. They had built wonders across the galaxy and lived in peace for millions of years. Then the war came. Scout did not know who started it or why. It only knew that they were hunted. Their enemies wanted their power for themselves, and when they could not take it, they decided to destroy it instead. They were nearly wiped out. Only a few survived. Those survivors did something desperate. They took their young, the children who had not yet come into their full power, and placed them into protective cocoons. These cocoons would keep the young ones alive but dormant, frozen in a state between life and death. The survivors scattered the cocoons across the galaxy and hid them in places no one would think to look. Then the survivors died fighting to give their children a chance. Scout was one of those children. Its cocoon had drifted through space for thousands of years before landing on a transport ship bound for station. Someone had found it in the cargo hold and thrown it away, thinking it was just a strange piece of debris. The cocoon had cracked open in the waste chute, and Scout had emerged weak and confused and dying. Until Danny found it. Danny sat in silence after Scout finished this story. He thought about the small, helpless creature he had pulled from the garbage. He thought about the mockery and the threats, and the long months of protecting something he did not understand. He had acted on instinct, on the simple belief that kindness mattered even when no one was watching. He had not known he was saving the last hope of an ancient civilization. But there was more to the story. Scout explained that its awakening had triggered something. When it emerged from a cocoon, it sent out a signal. This signal was meant to help the survivors find each other, but the survivors were all dead, and the signal could be detected by others too. The enemies who had hunted, though, were not all gone. Some of them still existed, still searching for any sign of survival. They had been waiting for thousands of years, patient and determined, and now they knew that at least one was alive. Danny felt fear settle into his stomach like a cold stone. He asked Scout what would happen when these enemies found them. Scout's dark eyes held sadness and determination. It said the enemies would come. They would try to capture Scout and use its power or destroy it. They would not care how many others died in the process. They had waited too long to let anything stop them now. The next weeks were tense. Chris had been monitoring communications as he promised, and he started noticing strange signals at the edge of the system. Ships were gathering out there, refusing to identify themselves when station control asked. They were waiting for something. Park organized the human workers quietly. She did not tell them everything, but she told them enough. Something dangerous was coming, and they needed to be ready to protect their own. The humans began mapping escape routes and gathering supplies. They checked the station's emergency systems and made sure they knew how everything worked. Counselor noticed the increased activity. He called Danny to his office and demanded to know what was happening. Danny said nothing, threatened him with expulsion from the station. Danny still said nothing. There was nothing he could say that would make the administrator understand what was coming. Vessel Speaker also noticed. The diplomat visited Danny's quarters unannounced one evening. He stood in the doorway and looked at Scout with those cold, calculating eyes. He said he knew something had changed. He said he could feel it. He warned Danny that secrets had a way of destroying those who kept them. Danny closed the door in his face. That night, Scout told Danny something important. When Scout fully matured, it would have abilities that could change the balance of power in the entire galaxy. They had been hunted because of what they could do. Their power was too great to be ignored by those who wanted control. Danny asked what this meant for them. He asked what would happen when Scout came into its full strength. Scout reached out and touched Danny's hand with its strange, delicate fingers. Its eyes were deep and warm. It said that Danny's kindness during the months when Scout was weak and helpless had created a bond between them. They did not form connections easily, but when they did, those bonds were unbreakable. Scout said that Danny had saved it when it was nothing. It said that whatever came next, it would not forget. It said that the enemies could come with all their ships and weapons, and it would not matter, because Scout had learned something from Danny that they had forgotten long ago. It had learned that true strength came from the heart. Danny did not sleep well that night. He lay awake and listened to the quiet sounds of the station and thought about what was coming. He was afraid. He would be a fool not to be afraid. But he also felt something else. He felt ready. The ships came out of nowhere. One moment the space around station was empty except for the usual trading vessels and transport shuttles. The next moment, a dozen dark shapes appeared on every sensor screen, moving fast and broadcasting no identification signals. Chris was the first to sound the alarm. He had been watching the long-range sensors for days, tracking the strange ships that had gathered at the edge of the system. When they finally moved, he activated the emergency broadcast and sent a warning to every screen on the station. The message was simple: unknown hostile vessels approaching. All residents prepare for emergency procedures. Panic spread through the station like fire. The merchants ran for their ships, pushing past anyone who got in their way. They cared nothing for the station or its other residents. They only wanted to escape with their cargo and their lives. Within minutes, a dozen merchant vessels were racing away from, leaving gaps in the docking bays like missing teeth. They were more controlled but just as selfish. Vessel Speaker ordered his diplomatic staff to seal themselves inside their embassy section. They activated security fields and locked every door. Whatever was coming, they intended to wait it out behind their shields and let others deal with the danger. Counselor broadcast a message demanding that the approaching ships identify themselves. The response came quickly. A voice that sounded like metal scraping against metal filled the communication channels. The voice identified itself as speaking for the Syndicate. Danny knew that name. Scout had told him about they were mercenary hunters who had been searching for surviving for centuries. They captured rare and valuable beings and sold them to the highest bidder. And even one not yet fully mature would be worth more than most planets. The voice made its demands clear. They wanted that was hiding on the station. They would take it by force if necessary. Anyone who interfered would be destroyed. Counselor surrendered immediately. He broadcast Danny's location and offered to help find their target. He begged them to spare the station and its remaining residents. The voice laughed, a horrible sound that made Danny's skin crawl, and said they would take what they wanted regardless of cooperation. The first boarding pods hit the station 20 minutes later. They punched through the outer hull in sections that were designed for cargo loading, areas that had minimal security. Soldiers poured out, creatures in dark armor with weapons that glowed with deadly energy. They moved fast and killed anyone who got in their way. Station security tried to respond. The guards were brave but outnumbered and they cut through them in minutes. Bodies lay in the corridors and the smell of burning metal and worse things filled the air. But the humans did not run. Park had prepared for this. She gathered the human workers in the maintenance sections, the parts of the station that no one else knew as well as they did. They sealed corridors and rerouted power. They created obstacles and traps using the station's own systems. They could not fight them directly, but they could slow them down and protect the civilians who had nowhere else to go. Chris stayed at his communication post even as the fighting grew closer. He tracked movements and relayed information too. He guided refugees to safe areas and warned when enemy soldiers were approaching. He was terrified, but he did not leave his station. Danny ran through corridors that were filling with smoke and screams. Scout moved beside him, its silver fur gleaming in the emergency lighting. They were heading for the deepest section of the station, a maintenance hub that few people even knew existed. Danny hoped they could hide there until the fighting was over. They almost made it. A squad of soldiers cut them off 3 levels above the hub. 6 armored figures with weapons raised, blocking the only path forward. Their leader stepped forward and looked at Scout with hungry eyes behind its helmet. The leader said they had been waiting a long time for this. It said the Syndicate would pay well for him. It said Danny should step aside if he wanted to live. Danny did not move. He stood in front of Scout and faced the soldiers with nothing but his bare hands. He knew he was going to die. He knew there was nothing he could do against armored killers with energy weapons, but he would not step aside. He would not abandon Scout. Scout touched Danny's shoulder from behind. Its voice was soft and sad. It told Danny to leave. It told Danny to save himself. It said the bond between them was precious, and it did not want Danny to die because of it. Danny shook his head. He said he did not save Scout just to walk away now. He said that whatever happened, they would face it together. He said that was what friends did. The leader laughed and raised its weapon. And then Scout changed. The silver streaks in Scout's fur began to blaze with light. Not a soft glow anymore, but a burning brightness that filled the corridor and made the soldiers shield their eyes. Scout's body lifted from the ground, rising until it floated above Danny. Energy crackled around its form like lightning caught in a bottle. Scout looked down at Danny with eyes that now shone like stars. Its voice was different now, deeper and carrying echoes of something ancient and powerful. It said thank you for teaching it what courage looks like. The transformation continued. Scout's physical form seemed to stretch and expand, becoming something that was both terrifying and beautiful. Wings of pure light spread from its back. Its limbs lengthened and became graceful. Its face was still recognizable, but now carried the weight of thousands of years of sleeping potential finally awakening. This was what it looked like in its true form. This was what the enemies had hunted to extinction. This was what Danny had saved from a waste chute and fed protein bars and talked to during lonely nights in a tiny room. The soldiers opened fire. Their weapons meant nothing. The energy blast struck Scout's glowing form and simply vanished, absorbed into the light like stones thrown into deep water. Scout raised one hand, and the weapons in the soldiers' grips crumbled to dust. The leader tried to run. Scout's eyes fixed on it, and the creature froze in place, unable to move. The other soldiers collapsed to their knees, overwhelmed by a pressure in their minds that they could not resist. Scout's voice filled the corridor, speaking not just to the soldiers but to every on the station. It said they had made a mistake. It said they had hunted the wrong prey. It said they remembered what had been done to them, and they did not forget. Danny watched in amazement as the being he had nursed from weakness to strength prepared to end the battle with a single thought. He should have been afraid. He should have felt small and insignificant before such power. But all he felt was pride. The battle for station lasted less than 20 minutes after Scout revealed its true form. The move through the corridors like a star walking among shadows. Where Scout passed, soldiers fell to their knees. Their weapons crumbled. Their armor split apart at the seams. Their minds filled with such overwhelming fear that most of them could do nothing but surrender and beg for mercy. Scout did not kill unless it had no choice. Some refused to stop fighting even when their weapons were gone. Some tried to take hostages or destroy station systems out of spite. These ones Scout dealt with quickly and finally. But the others, the ones who dropped their weapons and raised their hands, Scout left alive. Danny followed behind Scout, helping the wounded and directing survivors to safety. Chris joined him, his communication device still crackling with updates from across the station. Park organized teams to secure the area Scout had cleared and to treat the injured. The humans worked together like they had trained for this, which in a way they had. Outside the station, the ships tried to flee. Scout turned its attention to the void beyond the hull. Its wings of light spread wide, and energy pulsed outward in waves that Danny could feel even through the station's walls. The vessels lost power one by one, their engines dying and their weapons going dark. They drifted helplessly, unable to escape. By the time station security regained control, the battle was over. The threat had been neutralized by a single being that most of the station's residents had dismissed as a garbage pet. The aftermath brought changes that no one could have predicted. Counselor emerged from his hiding place and tried to act as if nothing had happened. He attempted to claim credit for the station's survival, suggesting that his quick thinking had somehow contributed to the victory. Scout looked at him with those star-bright eyes, and the administrator suddenly found himself unable to speak. He spent the next hour sitting in a corner, trembling and silent, as others took charge of the recovery efforts. The embassy unsealed its doors after the fighting stopped. Vessel Speaker walked out with his diplomatic staff, expecting to resume business as usual. But Chris had been monitoring communications throughout the attack. He had intercepted messages showing that they had been in contact with them for months. They had been selling information about Scout, hoping to profit when the syndicate made its move. Park presented this evidence to the station council. The council, now suddenly very interested in treating humans fairly, voted to expel the diplomatic mission from station. Protested and threatened and warned of consequences, but his words meant nothing anymore. He left on the next transport, his career in ruins. 3 days after the battle, Scout addressed the station. The recovery was still ongoing, but enough had been restored that people could gather in the main assembly hall. Hundreds of beings from dozens of species filled the space, looking up at that stood at the center of the raised platform. Scout's form still glowed softly, though less intensely than during the battle. Its wings were folded behind its back. Its voice carried to every corner of the hall without need for amplification. Scout explained what it was and where it had come from. It told the story of their golden age and their destruction. It spoke of the cocoons scattered across the galaxy and of its own long sleep before waking on this station. It thanked the residents for their hospitality, even the grudging kind. Then Scout turned and looked at Danny, who stood at the edge of the platform with and Chris beside him. Scout's voice softened. It said that many of the beings in this hall had mocked the human who saved it. They had called him foolish for showing kindness to something small and weak. They had laughed at his garbage pet and treated him with contempt. But it was that kindness that allowed Scout to become what it was. When Scout emerged from its cocoon, it was confused and dying and alone. It had no memory of who it was or what it could become. It was Danny who gave it food and warmth and protection. It was Danny who talked to it during long nights and taught it language and showed it what the universe could be. It was Danny's patient, stubborn love that allowed a child to grow into its power. Scout said they had a saying from the time before the war. The worth of a species is measured by how it treats those who can offer nothing in return. By that measure, humanity stood taller than any civilization Scout had encountered in its memories or its awakening. The hall was silent. The merchants who remained on the station looked at the floor. The other alien species exchanged glances of shame and wonder. They had underestimated humans. They had dismissed them as a lesser species not worthy of respect, and now they were learning how wrong they had been. After the assembly, representatives from a dozen different governments approached Danny. They offered him positions of honor, wealth beyond imagination, titles and privileges that few humans had ever been given. The Merchant Guild promised to make him one of their senior partners. A military delegation offered him a command rank. Even a replacement diplomat, hastily sent to repair relations, suggested that Danny could become an ambassador. Danny turned them all down. He asked only to keep his job on the station and to remain Scout's friend. The alien representatives were confused. They could not understand why anyone would refuse such rewards, but Danny knew that he had not saved Scout for rewards. He had saved Scout because it was the right thing to do. Accepting payment would cheapen something that had no price. Scout agreed to stay on station as an ambassador for the reborn nation. There were other cocoons scattered across the galaxy, Scout said, other children of its species who might still be awakened. Scout would work to find them and protect them, and it would do so from this station where it had learned what kindness meant. The months that followed brought more changes. Station became famous throughout the Galactic Compact. Beings traveled from distant systems just to see and to meet the human who had raised it. Trade increased. Diplomatic missions arrived from powers that had never bothered with the station before. But the biggest change was in how humans were treated. The species that had been dismissed as newcomers and primitives was now regarded with new respect. If one human working a cargo shift could recognize potential that the elder species had missed, what else might humanity achieve? The question echoed through council chambers and trading halls across the compact. Danny noticed the change but did not let it affect him. He went to work each day, maintained the station's systems, and spent his evenings with Scout. They talked about everything and nothing, the way old friends do. Sometimes Scout shared memories of the ancient. Sometimes Danny told stories about Earth, about Nebraska and the farm and the stars he used to watch as a boy. One evening, Danny asked Scout if it ever regretted the bond between them. Scout could do anything, go anywhere, become one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Why would it choose to stay with a simple maintenance worker on a trading station? Scout smiled, an expression it had learned from Danny. It said that power without purpose was meaningless. It said that they had once believed their abilities made them superior to other species. That pride had led to their downfall. But Danny had taught Scout something different. Danny had shown that true strength came from compassion, from the willingness to help someone who could offer nothing in return. That lesson was worth more than all the power in the universe. Danny laughed and said Scout was giving him too much credit. He said he just saw something that needed help and did what anyone would do. Scout shook its head. It said that was exactly the point. Danny did not think of himself as special. He simply acted from the heart without calculation or expectation. That was what made him remarkable. That was what made humanity remarkable. They sat together in Danny's quarters as the station hummed around them, watching the stars through the small window. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders and dangers. But in that moment, all that mattered was two friends sharing the silence, grateful for the strange path that had brought them together. The human, the ancient power and the simple heart. They had found something rare in the endless dark between the stars. They had found each other.